Mark, great story that you and Mark Bergen also worked together on, because what is really the desire here? Is it all about satellites for Apple now?
Absolutely. Apple is looking into all sorts of new areas. Like you said, AR, cars, we covered all of this. Now we're jumping into a new space that we're going to focus some attention on. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The sky, space, whatever you want to call it. So Apple hired two of the world's top leading experts in satellite hardware technologies, John Fenwick and Mike Trella, both from Google. They worked at a company called Skybox earlier, and they produce satellites as well. So we're not 100% clear on what Apple is going to be doing in the space, but now they have a hardware team with two of the best in that space. So we'll see in the near term and in the long term what they're up to.
David, get in here.
Well, I mean, when you hired Gurman, they called him a scoop machine. This guy just keeps turning out amazing stories about Apple. But I have to say, I think it makes sense. And here's why. You know, Apple's got this extraordinary valuation, this extraordinary resource of capital, et cetera. But they're basically a rich people's product company, right? The real growth opportunity to make them go to the moon even further from where they are is if they can go global and really get everybody, or make it possible for literally anyone to buy an Apple product, which is really not true in most countries. This is the way they could do it. If they could provide satellite internet access, as Mark's story says, you know, at a speed comparable to what we have with cellular, my gosh, that's just a huge thing. And then they could sell special devices for people in, you know, Botswana that would use that, and those people will buy it.
Right, to your point, David, the applications here are enormous. They can put internet around the world. They could also use it for their self-driving car efforts. If they need something to control the cars, they need to send information down to AR glasses. They can do that from satellites too. Being in the satellite business is critical for any technology company, but especially Apple, because they're trying to play in so many different fields. And another cool thing would be if they're just, you know, wanting to develop drones or other stuff to actually send people high in the air or take pictures from the air. You know, that would be cool. I'm sure, David, you would want to be one of the first to get into an Apple satellite and go into space.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I love the idea of using it for their car business, which doesn't exist, and maybe you'll tell us about that next week. But, you know, don't you think in the end that growth in the developing world has got to be one of their top priorities?
Absolutely, and part of what's holding back iPhone penetration in some of these smaller regions, these other countries, is that they don't have the penetration of LTE and these faster networks that the iPhones really take advantage of and almost need to function. So if Apple could speed that up, they could do two things here. One, they can get people to buy more hardware in those countries. Two, they can start replacing some of these carriers and other networks around the world. As we know, Apple always likes to add more of itself into its products. We saw that with chips. We saw that with them taking over new graphics processors recently. We see them doing more for the car, AR. Going after providing internet and wireless networking in the future is definitely on their list. They're looking at everything and anything to take over the world.
Wow. So telecoms, look out. What about an interesting team up potentially with Boeing? You reported on that. Can you explain as to whether this might be a joint venture we see?
Well, this is part of their, attempt to look at new businesses. Apple has so much cash, and they were definitely in talks with Boeing about Boeing's new internet broadcasting system through these constellation, as they call it, of satellites. If it doesn't work out for Apple internally to build their own, maybe it'll work out for them funding. They like to look at other companies before they, jump into those spaces. For example, Apple and Didi, their partnership, Apple gave them $1 billion to grow across Asia. Mm-hmm. And now Apple's looking at self-driving car technology of their own. Could be a similar approach if they end up investing in Boeing's business, taking a look at it, getting some skin in the game, and then jumping in with their own technology in the future. And I don't want to mince words. To be clear, we're not 100% sure what Apple's going to be doing with this new hardware team, but we do know it's a new hardware team led by Greg Duffy, who co-founded the camera company Dropcam before going to Nest, and now they have two of the world's leading satellite experts. So they're definitely going to be cooking up something, and that'll become clearer in the future.
David, most valuable company in the world, do these sorts of growth potentials mean that it remains as such?
Well, there have been a number of good arguments recently why Apple can still grow from where it is, and I have historically been a little skeptical about that, but I'm starting to change my tune and think that really maybe Apple still has moon to go towards. I just looked up, Boeing's market cap. Apple could buy Boeing and still have in cash and still have half of its cash left over. I mean, this company's got amazing opportunities.
And to add to that, and just one of the most amazing things that I've discovered over the course of reporting on the company for so many years, David and Caroline, when they're developing new products, they don't really take that many resources from other teams. They build up these teams. We had a whole story on this AR team, a bunch of outside hires. The Apple Watch, tons of outside hires. The Apple Car, and now the space exploration. So they're just adding and adding into this empire of different technology categories.